Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are going to talk about our eighth webinar. So this is our eighth webinar from our fiscal training series, and today we're talking about commingled versus co-located programs. So this webinar is being presented by the California Department of Education's Early Education and Nutrition Fiscal Services Unit of the Fiscal and Administrative Services Division. So for those that don't know me, I'm pretty sure most of you do now. My name is Corey Kahn, and I'm the manager over the Early Education and Nutrition Fiscal Services Unit. Today I'm joined by the EENFS fiscal analysts. We have managers. We also have some representatives from our early education division joining us as well. This is not a joint presentation like it was last week, but they will be monitoring the chat, the Q&A function. So we have disabled the chat box for participants, but CDE staff will be sharing links with you through the chat. Our team is committed to being as responsive as possible, but will likely not be able to answer every question. So please utilize that Q&A feature to ask us any questions and give us as much detail as possible before clicking that submit button. And one of our requests is for this webinar and with every webinar, just to keep your questions on topic. So like I said, we are discussing commingled versus co-located programs. And so that we have staff here that are ready to answer those type of questions. So at the end of this presentation, Kate Washington, who is a manager within the Early Education and Nutrition Fiscal Services Unit, she'll jump on and she'll facilitate a Q&A session where she'll go over some frequently asked questions that may have come through the chat, or sorry, I keep saying chat, but the Q&A function. But we will also have an opportunity to call on participants who have raised their hand. And so if we're not able to get through all the questions, we'll take them back and we'll reach out to you later, or we might use them to develop a frequently asked questions page. So we ask that you submit your questions through the Q&A, and when you do, include identifying information such as like your vendor number or your agency name. And that will allow us to track questions that have come in and follow up with you in case they weren't answered during the webinar. So as I've announced in the past webinars, we have a web page that we created dedicated to fiscal webinars and training. So that's where we're posting these recordings. And so that web page can be found at www.cde.ca.gov/FG/AA/CD/webinars and trainings.asp. So this link has been posted to our chat already. And so our office has been recording these webinars. And one of our team members, Jenny Tran, has been working on transcribing the webinars so that they can be posted. So navigating to this page, you'll find a table with 3 columns, which identifies the date in which the webinar took place, the recording link, and then the summary of training topics. So for example, the first webinar was conducted on November 13th, 2024. It was entitled Enrollment, Attendance, and Fiscal Reporting Requirements. And the topics that we went over were reporting requirements, enrollment and attendance, source documentation, and revenue and expense source documents. So you all can go to this webpage at any time. Any of your staff, you can direct them to this webpage to listen to. And so at this point, I believe we have 4 of our past webinars posted already, and we are continuously working on getting all the other ones posted that we have recorded thus far. And so they will just be posted to this table as they become available. So just as a recommendation, if you're looking for one of our past webinars, just periodically navigate to this webpage just to see if the one you are interested has been posted. That's all I have this morning for housekeeping. So now I'm going to turn it over to your presenters for the morning, and that is Joey Boyd and Morgan Leffel.
Thank you, Corey. Good morning, everyone. My name is Morgan Leffel, and I'm a fiscal analyst in the Early Education Nutrition and Fiscal Services Division. Today, we will be covering topics which will include what is the difference between a commingled program and a co-located program. This will include how a CSPP commingled and co-located program are defined in regulation. We'll also briefly discuss cost allocation plans overviews and general requirements of those. Then we will cover several examples of both commingled classrooms and co-located programs and examples on how to report each in CPARIS before going into our Q&A session. So we'll begin with a simple visual on what co-located programs and commingled programs might look like. So the graphic on the left-hand side illustrates a co-located program. In this example, there are 4 co-located classrooms separating children by program type. The first classroom has only CSPP certified children enrolled. The second classroom is all children enrolled in the General Child Care Program, or CCTR. The third classroom is children enrolled in Transitional Kindergarten, or TK. And the last classroom serves all of the private pay families. The graphic on the right-hand side illustrates a commingled classroom, where children enrolled in different programs such as CSPP, CCTR, private pay, and TK are being served in the same classroom at the same time. In both examples, the same number of programs are being administered, depending on whether your program is commingling children in the same classroom or co-locating at the same location will have different requirements for reporting. So now we'll discuss some definitions of a commingled program and a co-located program. First, commingled programs per California Code of Regulations, Title V, Section 17700Q. A commingled program is defined as the provision of services to both subsidized, to both subsidized and non-subsidized children in the same classroom at the same time. The most common example of a commingled program is a program that serves both certified children or subsidized by the contractor's CSPP contract and non-certified children, which are funded by a source other than the CSPP contract. Co-located programs, on the other hand, are those that share the same facility, but not the same classroom. The most common instance would be a CDE CSPP classroom and a CDSS CCTR classroom at the same site. Please note, as mentioned in the previous slide, there could be more than 2 programs being co-located at the same facility. Co-located programs are typically programs that cannot be commingled because they are different types of programs with different program requirements, or program types that can be commingled, but the contractor chooses not to do so. Contractors with co-located contracts must ensure subsidized children are not enrolled in more than 1 program at the same time. When contractors have a commingled or co-located programs, oftentimes a cost allocation plan will be necessary to be able to accurately report the appropriate costs for each program. Let's briefly discuss a cost allocation plan. A cost allocation plan identifies the appropriate amount of expenses to be ascribed to a program. Contractors use cost allocation plans when different programs are co-located and have shared expenses. Contractors must maintain written documentation of the rationale used in determining direct and administrative costs. The cost allocation plan acts as a guide to how costs are allocated to each income source. The plan should be reviewed by a CPA prior to implementation. And finally, the cost allocation plan must be on file and be made available to CDE staff upon request. A few other notes on cost allocation plans. Your cost allocation plan may be for direct costs or indirect costs. Some examples to use your cost allocation plan would be a program director's salary, rent, or utilities. Contractors can find more information on the cost allocation plan and requirements in the CDE audit guide. You can also contact your CPA for additional guidance. We will drop the link for the CDE audit guide in the chat. So you can find this at https://www.cde.gov/FG/AU/PM/. Now I'll hand it off to my colleague Joey Boyd, who will cover commingled reporting.
Thank you, Morgan, and good morning to everyone. Now that we have covered what commingled programs and co-located programs are, let's move on to how to report the two. In a commingled classroom, the cost of providing preschool services is not contingent upon being a certified or non-certified child, and services for each child in the classroom should be equitable regardless of the fund source. To ease the administrative burden, contractors should report all costs associated with the commingled classroom and the certified and non-certified enrollment. EMFS determines CSPP program cost by prorating the total cost of the program based on the percentage of certified child days of enrollment reported. However, when the amount received for non-certified children greatly differ from the CSPP reimbursement rate, contractors should cost allocate cost. We will go over a few examples on the next slide of how to report commingled classrooms. There are different ways to report commingled programs, in which we have developed an example of 3 different types of commingled programs. We will cover in more detail how to report each in CPARs over the next few slides. Again, as a reminder, a commingled program is a program that serves both subsidized and non-subsidized children in the same classroom at the same time. A commingled program might have more than one classroom, which they do in this example. So in our examples, classroom 1 has CSPP certified children and CSPP non-certified children. This classroom will have both certified and non-certified child days of enrollment and all costs for the classroom reported in the enrollment, attendance, and fiscal reports. Classroom 2 has CSPP certified children and CCTR certified children. This classroom will only report CSPP CDEs and cost allocate expenses, such as utility or rent, associated with CSPP children reported in the enrollment, attendance, and fiscal reports. Lastly, in classroom 3, we have CSPP certified children and transitional kindergarten children. Like classroom 2, this classroom will only report CSPP CDEs and cost allocate expenses associated with CSPP children reported in the enrollment, attendance, and fiscal reports. And I'll break this down over the next few slides. Okay, let's start by reviewing how to report enrollment and fiscal data in Classroom 1 in CPARs. As a reminder from the previous slide, Classroom 1 had both CSPP and private pay children, non-certified, commingled in the same classroom at the same time. For this example, Classroom 1 has 12 full-time 3-year-old children enrolled in CSPP. This classroom is commingled with 12 full-time 3-year-old children who are not certified or private pay. Under the Enrollment tab of the Enrollment, Attendance, and Fiscal Report in CPARs, the contractor would report the child days of enrollment for 12 certified CSPP children under the Certified Children Enrollment 2-year-old and 3-year-old full-time adjustment factor category. Because this adjustment factor for the full-time 3-year-old is 1.8, 12 CDEs are adjusted to 21.6 adjusted CDEs. The second graphic on the slide is showing the 12 private pay children being reported in the enrollment report under non-certified enrollment 2-year-old and 3-year-old full-time adjustment factor category. Because the adjustment factor for the full-time 3-year-old is 1.8, the 12 CDEs are adjusted to 21.6 adjusted CDEs. For ease of this example, What is being displayed here is the enrollment for this classroom for 1 day of operation. When submitting the enrollment, attendance, and fiscal reports, contractors must report the total of every child enrollment for the days the contractor is open to provide services for the reporting period. For example, if all children were enrolled for 20 days during the reporting period, the contractor would report 240 child days of enrollment. Now on to how to report the expenses for Classroom 1. Shown on the slide is the reimbursable expenses section found on the fiscal tab of the enrollment, attendance, and fiscal reports in CPARES. We won't go into much detail for each specific category of expenses for Classroom 1, but to stress that since enrollment and attendance were both reported for certified and non-certified children, all expenses associated with Classroom 1 would be reported. In this situation, this classroom would not cost allocate any of the expenses, and all of the costs reported should represent the cost of the entire classroom. So for this example, this commingled classroom expenses is $26,900. I'll show in the next slides that CPARES will perform a calculation based on the percentage of certified to non-certified children. Now let's look at how CPARES will allocate costs to the CSPP program based on the certified and non-certified enrollment reported. This can be found on the contractor's calculation worksheet. Once your agency certifies the enrollment, attendance, and fiscal reports in CPARES, and your fiscal analyst approves it, a calculation worksheet will be generated. Costs will be prorated based on the percent certified days of enrollment, specifically CPARES prorated costs by taking the adjusted certified days of enrollment, reported and divided that number by the total adjusted days of enrollment for both certified and non-certified children. Because our example is using 12 certified and 12 non-certified in the same category, with both adjusted CDEs being 21.6, the percentage of certified children is 50%. This percentage will be applied to the net expenses of $26,900 to determine how much of the reported cost will be attributed to CSPP. This calculation will result in $13,450 being attributed to CSPP. Now let's move on to Classroom 2, which is a commingled classroom of CSPP and CCTR children. The classroom overview for this classroom is 12 full-time 3-year-old children enrolled in CSPP and 12 full-time toddlers certified in the CCTR program. As displayed on the bottom of the screen, the 12 CSPP children are reported in the 2-year-old and 3-year-old full-time adjustment category in the enrollment attendance section of the report. As in the last example, what is being displayed here is the enrollment for the classroom for 1 day of operation. When submitting enrollment, attendance, and fiscal reports, contractors must report a total of every child's enrollment for the days of the contractor is open to provide services for that reporting period. For example, if all children were enrolled for 20 days during the reporting period, the contractor would report 240 CDEs. The CDEs for the CCTR children, however, are not going to be reported in the enrollment attendance section of this report. Let's now look at the fiscal report for Classroom 2. Because the contractor is not reporting CCTR child days of enrollment, they must use a cost allocation plan to determine what percentage of costs for the classroom would be reported to the CSPP program, and the balance would be reported to CCTR. In this example, the contractor reported $13,250, which represents costs associated with the CSPP certified children only and not the entire classroom. Before we look at an example of how Classroom 3, which is CSPP commingled and transitional kindergarten, let's discuss some general guidance on reporting child days of enrollment for transitional kindergarten. Children enrolled in transitional kindergarten or a Head Start program may be enrolled in the Part Day CSPP for extended learning and care services during the hours that they are not receiving educational services in TK, kindergarten, or Head Start program. When children are enrolled in a Part Day CSPP to provide extended learning and care beyond TK or kindergarten hours, report the child days of enrollment, CDEs, funded by the CSPP in the appropriate part-time adjustment factor category for certified children. Do not report days of enrollment funded by TK or kindergarten. Do not report expenses associated with TK or kindergarten. Contractors must have a cost allocation plan to accurately report the appropriate cost for each program. We'll see how this is reported on the enrollment attendance report on the next slide. Okay, so for classroom 3 example, the classroom overview is a commingled classroom of 12 full-time 3-year-olds enrolled in CSPP and 12 children enrolled in the TK program for the AM and then enrolled in the CSPP program in the PM. When reporting this in CPARES, the contractor would report the 12 full-time 3-year-old in the 2-year-old and 3-year-old full-time category, and 12 children reported in the 4-year-old part-time category for 12 children who are enrolled in CSPP as part of the extended day from TK. Note on this report that the TK portion of the day is not reported on the enrollment attendance report. That only part of the day in which those 12 children were enrolled in CSPP are going to be reported. Now let's look at the fiscal report for classroom 3. Similar to example 2, because the contractor is not reporting the enrollment associated with the time spent in TK, they must use a cost allocation plan to determine what percentage of the cost for the classroom would be reported to the CSPP program. In this example, the contractor reported $19,500, which represents costs associated with the CSPP program for the 12 full-time children and 12 part-time children enrolled in CSPP. What is reported here should not include any costs related to the TK portion of the day. Now I'm going to pass it back to Morgan, who will cover co-located programs.
Thank you, Joey. So now that we've discussed commingled programs in depth, let's transition to co-located programs. So co-located programs likely have shared costs such as rent or utilities. Contractors with co-located programs must have a cost allocation plan to accurately identify the appropriate costs for each program. Contractors will only report CSPP enrollment, attendance, and expense data to the CDE, and data of other co-located non-CSPP programs will not be reported to the CDE. So here we've created an example to explain how to report a CSPP co-located program in CPARES. In general, contractors will only report the enrollment, attendance, expenses, and revenue related to CSPP programs on the enrollment, attendance, and fiscal report. In doing so, contractors will need a cost allocation plan to associate costs of the CSPP program. As a reminder, a co-located program is a program that shares the same facility but does not share the same classroom. In this example, this contractor runs a co-located program. Classroom 1 is a commingled CSPP program serving CSPP certified and CSPP non-certified children. Classroom 2 has CCTR children. Classroom 3 is their TK program, and Classroom 4 is comprised of private pay children. Because Classroom 1 is a commingled classroom, the contractor would follow the reporting as we reviewed in our commingled classroom example number 1. Specifically, the contractor would report all CSPP certified and CSPP non-certified CDEs, the cost of the entire classroom, meaning for both certified and non-certified CSPP children. If the contractor had any shared costs, such as utilities or rent, the amount associated with the CSPP commingled classroom would be determined by the agency's cost allocation plan on file. Classroom 2 serves only CCTR children, since there are no CSPP children in the classroom. The contractor would not report any CCTR CDEs on the enrollment, attendance, and physical report, nor would they report any costs for the classroom. Similarly, in Classroom 3, the TK classroom, there are no CSPP children in the classroom, so the contractor would not report any TK CDEs on the enrollment, attendance, and physical report, nor would they report any costs for the classroom. For Classroom 4, there are no CSPP children in the classroom. There are only private pay children. And because this classroom is not commingled with CSPP children, the contractor would not report any CDEs or costs associated with that classroom. Let's look more in depth at classroom number 1. This program is serving 12 full-time 3-year-old CSPP children and 12 full-time 3-year-old non-certified CSPP children. Here, we can see that the 12 CSPP children were reported in the 2 years old and 3-year-old full-time adjustment factor category, and the 12 non-certified children would be reported in the enrollment report under non-certified children enrollment in the 2 years old and 3 years old full-time adjustment factor category. Again, like with the commingled examples, what is being displayed here is the enrollment for this classroom for 1 day of operation. When submitting enrollment, attendance, and physical reports, contractors must report the total of every child's enrollment for the days the contractor is open to provide services for the reporting period. For example, if all children were enrolled for 20 days during the reporting period, the contractor would report 240 CDEs. As shown on the slide is the reimbursable expenses section on the fiscal report in CPARIS. Again, we won't go into much detail about each specific category of the expenses for Classroom 1. But here, because both certified and non-certified children were reported in the enrollment and attendance report, the contractor will cost allocate expenses such as rent and utilities, and all expenses for Classroom number 1 will be reported on the fiscal report. The calculation worksheet will prorate Classroom number 1's expenses by the ratio of certified to non-certified children, as reviewed in Example 1 of the commingled classroom. The contractor would not report any additional information for other classrooms co-located with CSPP. In our example, Classrooms 2, 3, and 4 served TK, CCTR, and private pay children, so contractors do not report the child days of enrollment on CPARIS in the enrollment and attendance report for these co-located programs, and would not report any of the expenses of the co-located programs on the CPARIS fiscal report. Finally, let's summarize the key takeaways of a commingled and a co-located program. A contractor has a commingled program when CSPP certified and non-certified children are in the same classroom at the same time. A contractor has a co-located program when the CSPP program is located at a facility that serves other children, but not in the same classroom at the same time. With both commingled and co-located programs, the enrollment and costs of the child may not be charged to more than one program. A cost allocation plan is necessary when identifying costs associated with the CSPP program. Cost allocation plans should be reviewed periodically to ensure methodologies are still accurate. Thank you. That concludes the presentation portion on commingled versus co-located programs. Now we'll transition into our Q&A portion. Thank you.